I'm often asked when pitching the Trailstar, particularly the Cuben Trailstar but the Sun Island too, how do you find the rear? Well, the easiest way that I have of finding the rear is to find the front first. In this case I've just pegged it out because it's very windy. If you find the front and like tripping over everything, and then just work your way down, and because of the shape of it, you find the rear very, very easily. So find the front, work your way to the other end, and that's your rear. Once you've got the rear, just peg the rear out like that, and you, hello in there, and you've now got the, the rear is now pegged out. Yes, I just said that right. Right, the pegs that I like to use, these are 9-inch Eastern pegs. I don't know how well you can see that there. So I like to use these 9-inch Eastern pegs. If you don't want these, Lassie, around here. Lassie, come on, good girl. You could use an MSR groundhog peg or something like that. But with a shelter like this, you do want a good strong peg. Don't go going for little thin cheapy pegs, especially in bad weather. One of the problems that I think I was having when I was pitching the Trailstar in the very early days is I was pitching with very, very short guy lines, and I think with the Sun Island Trailstar, I think you can get away with shorter guy lines. Personally, I think with the Cuben Trailstar you do require longer guy lines. I think it helps with the angles when it comes to pitching this non-stretch material. So I've put on the corners, I think I've got 3.5 feet of guy line, whereas before I was probably using about 18 inches or something like that. So I have gone for longer guys. So obviously once the rear is pitched out, then pitch this side out here. I'll go for long lines for the moment, but again, of course, you can shorten them after. And then once you've done that corner, of course, you can then come over and pitch out this corner. Once you've pitched the rear corners, I would then shorten the line off just a little bit, and for the moment just pitch or just peg in that side and this side here. The lengths at this stage don't really matter, but I would pitch or peg them in sort of maybe about a metre apart, something like that, approximately. So first of all, if we go for around about a 1 metre pitch, my belly button is about a metre, and that's around about 1 metre there. Right, so you take your 1 metre pole. I did not bring bungs with me, but normally I would put a bung on the end because it just stops the point from sinking in the ground. Personally, I think it's better if it doesn't sink in the ground, and then it's easier to readjust inside, but I did forget the bung. While I think of it, I just use this type of loop knot here. It's just a normal, I don't know what it's called, Very helpful as usual, but it's a simple knot thing there over the peg to hold that in place. And I've also been asked how high or how long this pole should be and how close this pole should be to the guy line here. My answer to that is it really depends on how everything else goes together. So for the moment it doesn't really matter, we'll just keep it. It's about 1 metre. It's maybe about 1 foot away. You'll have to excuse me chopping and changing between metres and feet. I'll stick it in the ground for now for ease, and then we'll just peg that out there. And of course another question that I get asked is how long should that line be? I think mine is around about I think I've got about 10 feet or something, 10 feet 3 meters on that front line. Now obviously looking around it, it's all, you know, flappy and horrible and everything, so it now needs tightening up. And as I say, just remember this is the low pitch, so let's see what happens. So that's the rear tightened up. Now you will see that there's one error already crept in, and this is really important. Your guy line must be parallel with the ridge line coming down, and you can see in my initial setup it's offset over here, and it's not an error, but obviously I just did it roughly in the first place, so that needs tidying up. Right, the pacer pole in this instance is the carbon one. Forget it's all cramped in here, I haven't pegged this out properly yet, of course, but I've got the pacer pole at this angle here. Right, so now what we need to do is to straighten up this line, and you'll notice that I've got a long line on here, so I've just straightened that up there. To be honest, this is probably as low as you would want to pitch this. You might actually want to pitch this ideally a little bit higher, but it will be interesting to see what happens. And again, this line here I've got here, so this needs straightening up here as well, and then tighten that up there. So we now have tight, and in fact I still haven't quite got that straight there. You do want that straight. So that's now got the back of it tight. I find with Cuben, and maybe it's just me, I don't know, but I find that I don't always get all of these bits tight down here. So, you know, don't worry too much about that. The bits that you want tight are the panels. Right, now come round to the front, and I would just do a few alterations here. First of all, loosen this off. Make the front loose, and then you have to work, I find you have to work with Cuben, not against it. So just loosen it off a bit. Make the pole a little bit closer because it was too far away there. So now it's about 1 foot away. and then take the slack up here, make sure that peg's in, and make sure this line, this pole, and the pole inside, and the rear peg are in a straight line. Then you want to bring, and again you may find that you want long line here or short line, but if you give yourself long line, then you've given yourself more options. So give yourself a long line and tighten. In fact, just I've tightened that a bit too much, so just tighten it a bit. Like I say, you've just got to work with it. And then here, again, give yourself a long bit of line, get that peg in there. So let's just make sure that you're looking at me. Come on, Leslie, round here. Round here, come on. Good girl. And then just tighten that one up there. And then the last thing that you can do is just alter this line here. This, because this door is now very, very low, this is a pretty good storm shelter now because you've got such a low front door, and it's only recently that I've been able to get a low front door on the Cuben Trailstar. The Cuben Trailstar, I was always having a narrow front door, but I'm finding that the longer guy lines on all of the edges and everything, longer guy lines is meaning that I can get this door much lower, and that's a huge advantage. So I'll just lower the pole. I'm just lowering the pole really just so that this angle up here isn't too acute. Over here, Lassie. Go around here, good girl. So as I say, that's probably a bit on the high side, but it'll do for now. And then once that's done, tighten that one up there. Pegged out the 5 corners and the door, you are now ready to peg out the edges. Now, like I say, Cuben is totally different to seal nylon, and you're always going to get a little bit of slack in a couple of places. Even I haven't yet, unfortunately, been able to eliminate all slack. Sorry, I think the camera's on the tripod, so I'm not holding it properly, and the microphone's obviously the wrong way. So now what you need are pegs. Now I got hold of these MSR pegs. Even though you want the major pegs on the 5 corners plus the door, you still want very, very good pegs on the 4 midpoint tie out. So these should be okay. I have used Ron's little MLD spikes, or the little shepherd hooks, but really, personally, I think this shelter does need quite good and quite strong pegs, especially in the winter and in the wind, on these mid-panel tie-outs. So don't skimp on pegs on these mid-panel tie-outs. And in the winter, I would probably put some pretty beefy pegs on, to be honest with you. And again, using long lines, you'll find you're able to get it a lot tighter. You will notice that even with a low pitch like this, I was still getting a gap around the bottom. Now I know a lot of people don't like gaps. With this type of shelter, it's something that you have to sort of put up with a bit. To be honest, I think a lot of the problems arise when you try and pitch this too close to the ground, and we'll investigate that. This side, interestingly, is the highest side. That's just the way that it's worked out, to be honest, there. Right, a couple of pegs aren't quite straight. This one here isn't straight, so let's just straighten that up. Okay, now there's a couple of tricks that I've discovered recently. You'll notice that the front is quite high up off the ground here, and is a little bit high up on the ground here but lower back there. And the back is obviously quite low there. Now in this instance that's probably perfect, and I probably wouldn't mess with that too much, because if the wind is blowing in this direction, you want the back to be as low to the ground as possible. That's probably as low as you're going to realistically get. You could probably get a bit lower, but that's a pretty reasonable height there. Now if you do want to change things, I'll show you what I've figured out, and it's pretty straightforward. If you loosen off, and this is why it's handy to have long lines, if you loosen off that one, obviously loosen off that one a bit, loosen off that one, just basically loosen off all of these at the back. Be able to pull everything forward a bit. So pull that one forward, and now you can get the front lower to the ground. This is a horrible day for doing this sort of pitching video. It's misty and miserable. You'll now see the back is a fraction higher than it was, and the front is still raised up a bit, but it's a bit lower than it was. So obviously if you want to have, look at that dog, if you want to have one side lower because the wind is coming in a certain direction, then make those lines longer there to give slack. You could then tighten these lines up here and at the back, and then you could get this side lower to the ground, and then of course you'd have those parts low to the ground, and then you'd have a bit more height here. And don't forget, ventilation is good. Ventilation helps with dew and condensation, so don't be frightened about gaps. Gaps don't worry me too much. The shelter I want to keep out the rain, most of the wind, and my sleep system is what keeps me warm in a shelter like this. And as I say, I've managed to tighten up this, and obviously if you do something, then just tighten that one up as well. And just by tightening that up, we've now got it, you know, low and tight to the ground, or tighter to the ground. And again, inside you can always put a backpack somewhere in there just to take up a bit of room, or a bit of that space under there. Realistically, this really is as low to the ground as you're ever going to want this shelter. Any lower than this and it is going to be too low, but this is going to be a pretty good storm worthy, you know, shelter in here. So you are, you know, obviously limited to height, but that's, you know, that's deliberate. You know, we've deliberately pitched it low because there's a storm coming through, and you know, you have still got, you know, an absolute ton of room. I'm not going to lie down, but it's soaking wet and horrible, but obviously, you know, I've still got room to lie down this side, which is the side I like to use, and then obviously if there's a second person, or hello, if you've got a dog, you know, you've still got a ton of space over there. So as I say, you just have to embrace a bit of a gap. You can probably play around and get rid of it, but it is quite tight. Oh, it's tight, isn't it? Yes, I know. So yeah, that's your low pitch. I need a cup of tea. All right, let's see. Ooh. And you're almost. Oh, let's see. You're almost crawling out on your hands and knees, but you're not quite. You know, I can get out. I mean, I'm not. Let's see, steady. Ow. Oh, ow. Steady. I mean, I'm only 44. I'm not quite having to get out on my hands and knees at this height. Yeah, thank you, Lassie. Yeah, no, you're very beautiful too. Thank you. We got to get out, Lassie. Right, I've just loosened everything off. So let's go for a higher pitch. So we did the 1 meter pitch, which in all honesty you're not going to want to use too often. So I don't know how high this is, but that's probably about 1 meter 20 up to here. So we'll aim for that. And for those that use pacer poles, I've gone to the stop mark and the pacer pole mark there. I wouldn't make this section too long because it's carbon fibre, so I would keep that section short. So pacer pole mark there, stop here, and this is on the carbon pacer pole. So we'll do exactly the same thing. We will go inside. Right, we'll make this one longer as well. For the moment, I really just want to get it stable because it's flapping around so much. So this is more of a stability control thing, so don't worry about it too much. So let's just make sure we're straight inside. Now of course, because I've made it higher, you know, I can now walk, well, I can Yodify myself in like this. So just make sure that that's in there. That looks okay. So let's just pop around the rear and now straighten up this one. Now because we're higher, I would make the line longer. I think the critical thing is the higher the centre pole, the longer the guy line needs to be. tighten that up. And again, don't worry too much about gaps. Make sure it's straight as well. So again, just tighten that one off there, like that. And then that one there. Give that one a quick tighten up there. And that's now a much higher pitch. So you can now come in, and as I say, you've still got a very, very storm where the shelter, this pole isn't quite straight. Because it's sunk into the ground, I now can't move it. That's why I like a bung on the bottom, and then the bung stops it sinking in, and then you can just about move it around. You need this height of about 1.25 m or thereabouts for the MLD inner to go in here, which I didn't bring today. I knew this was going to be a long, complicated video just pitching this without adding inners as well. Right, I know that a lot of people say, why not pitch it lower to the ground? Or why not use short guy lines like that? And this is exactly why. Sometimes the best way to show you how not to do something is to do it wrong, so that you can physically see what happens. When you put really, really short lines on, like just a few inches, that's when Cuben struggles. And again, I've done the same on that one there. So you use a really short line, like here, and then you're changing the angle. It's my belief that Cuben is all to do with angles. And of course, what I was doing wrong, and what I suspect a lot of people do wrong with this, is what they do, and certainly what I did in the very early days. I was using very short lines, and because it was all slack and loose here, I was compensating for that by moving this line forward. And then of course, because that line was forward, it was meaning that this edge here was getting all slack. And because that was getting all slack, I was then having to move that around. And of course I was doing the same on this side. This is what I was doing wrong in the early days. So you see, I was using short lines. So to try and compensate, I was moving this line here forward this way. And then of course I was then having to move this line this way. And that's why I was always ending up with a narrow door. Sometimes I had a door that you couldn't thread the needle through a thingamybobs. So that's why long lines, I believe, and I could be wrong, maybe I'm still doing it wrong, but I believe that long lines for the Cuben Trailstar are critical. So again, back here, once you've lengthened these lines, you tighten everything up substantially. Now the thing to remember is, the higher the center pole, the longer your lines are going to have to be. So if I was to raise that center pole another 5 or 10 centimeters, my lines will not be long enough. But realistically, for what we do, you're never going to need it higher than 125, 130 centimeters anyway. And again, I know a lot of people then moan about gaps, but it's easy to sort the gaps out. And you can put the gap wherever you want the gap. Right, so in this instance, the wind is coming over my right shoulder. Sorry, the wind's coming over my right shoulder. So a gap this side, it doesn't matter. So what I would suggest, you know, just loosen all of these off a fraction. Not much, just a bit. And now, because the wind is coming from this direction, so everyone who doesn't like gaps underneath, because you've loosened off that side a bit, you can now get this side, admittedly it's not that much lower, but it is a bit lower. Right, I've loosened them off even more. Right, so now what I've done is I've lowered this side by heightening the other side. So, okay, the rear is still up a little bit, but you'll get the general idea. If the wind was blowing in that direction, then obviously you can get that edge and the back quite close to the ground. And then obviously this side and the front, which technically is downwind, so it doesn't really matter. You know, you can have that, you know, a little bit higher. And again, it's just a matter of playing around with it. The pole in here has gone skew-whiff again because I can't adjust it. So I hope that helps a little bit with pitching this. As I say, ideally, really, I would have this one, because by having that edge quite low to the ground, you've got quite a pronounced cantonary curve there. So you've just got to play around with it. And once you've learned to embrace it, like I did a couple of years ago, as I say, it's certainly my favourite shelter by a long, long way. Right, it's just decided to start raining, so it's just as well I pretty much finished when I did. I just wanted to show that, you know, you are going to get, you know, it's not exactly a hurricane force here, but it is raining, there is a breeze, you know, you are going to get, you know, a little bit of flap going on in places. So bearing in mind there's not much wind out there, but you know, you are going to get, you know, a tiny bit of movement. And again, you just have to accept that you know, that happens and not worry about it, and trust your equipment. And again, you know, the higher your pole the longer your pole is, you know, make sure your lines are long enough, because that's a lot of the problem. And I would even, there's a little bit of slack there, which again, in this weather it doesn't matter. And bearing in mind, if the wind was really, really bad, I would be pitching lower. And don't forget, when you're lower with those longer lines, you get rid of all of that. But as you get higher and your lines get shorter, or your lines aren't long enough, that's when you get, you know, a little bit of, you know, of that not completely tight hemline going on. And again, in this type of weather, you know, that doesn't matter. I ought to actually point the camera at me, because I don't think I've actually pointed the camera at me. So like I said, if I think of anything else before the rain goes and before I pack up, then I'll let you know. If you've got any questions or comments, then obviously, you know, ask as well. And, you know, again, I hope this has been helpful, and it's probably very long, but all my videos are long anyway. So, but, you know, thanks for watching, and catch you again soon. Right, there's just a tiny break in the weather that I can just tell you how to fold it up. Right, the way that I do it is Cuben don't stuff Cuben, it doesn't like stuffing. So have your stuffed sack. This one's actually a bit too big, so this isn't my normal one, but have a stuffed sack and lay it something like that, and then roll it towards you, and as you roll it, just sort of tuck the edges in a bit, because obviously as you roll it, it's going to get wider, but just roll it in so that it's no wider or longer or whatever than the stuffed sack you're going to be stuffing it in. And as I say, I wouldn't normally use this one, this is a bit too big, but then, you know, it's then very easy to fold it away and stuff up. Pardon the expression. And you probably would have wanted to have given it a shake as well to get some of the water off. So that's how I pack it away. And then when you get home, obviously unfold it, dry it out, but do not fold it up like that when you get home. When you get home, get a big aerating type laundry bag or something like that, maybe 2 or 3 feet long, maybe a couple of feet wide or something, and just gently store it in there, or maybe in a big bag or something like that, but store Cuben loose. Do not fold it up like that or roll it up like that for storage.